This next series is going to be on the topic of sensitivity. This topic is a big one for me because I'm somebody who's deeply sensitive, and I feel instant connection with other people who are deeply sensitive, and I have a great level of empathy and compassion, right? But I also know the dark side of sensitivity, right? When we are extremely overwhelmed by emotions, when we have no, emotional regulation skills, and we don't know how to handle the overstimulation and dysregulation that comes with not knowing how to manage that sensitivity, right? Especially if we're in environments that don't support that, right? We already live in a society that does not award sensitivity, right? You got to be tough, you got to be able to tolerate anything and everything, you got to be logical. There's just not a lot of compassion for people who are sensitive. And what does that mean? What does it mean to be sensitive? People automatically assume like, oh, you just take everything personally, or everything affects you. And that's not always the case, but it has been the case for me in the past. And I feel like, I've grown a long way, and it doesn't have to be the bane of your existence. So if you're somebody who's very sensitive, stay tuned. I have a couple videos coming up where we're going to talk about what it means to be sensitive, how to gain those regulation skills, how to deal with people who are on the opposite end of that spectrum. Right? A lot of us have learned to repress those emotions. We've learned how to shrink ourselves. We've learned how to, cope in a world that just doesn't support us, right? But the goal is not to become less sensitive, right? The world that we live in right now needs more sensitivity, needs people who feel deeply, needs people who are aware of things that others might not be aware of, right? There's a certain level of responsibility and accountability that comes with being a sensitive human being. So what does it mean to be sensitive? We process more. Like, while some people process one thing at a time, right? Somebody's talking to you, you're processing their words. Somebody's talking to me, I'm processing their tone, I'm processing their nonverbal, I'm processing what's happening in between the lines. There's multiple things that I'm processing at once. I'm also processing what I'm feeling, what I'm thinking, and before I speak, I'm processing how the other person might react, how the other person might feel. So it's like this continuous multi-process type of thing, right? When you're sensitive, you tend to be deeply intuitive, meaning your body typically responds to things in a way that it may not for other people, right? So you get a feeling, you get anxiety, you get, different sensations in the body, or you feel like something just isn't right? Or you feel like a sense of knowing. We all have intuition, right? But people who tend to be more sensitive usually have a deeper sense of intuition. Now, with that, right, a lot of us have learned to kind of gaslight ourselves. We've learned that when we speak on certain things, right, when we get that intuition and we decide to be vocal about it, it doesn't always sit well with people, right? People get defensive. They feel like they need to justify their stance or their reasoning, or they feel a need to tell you that you're wrong. And so you learned over time, like, my intuition is wrong. Every time I speak up, every time I say something, somebody's mad, somebody's abandoning me, somebody's rejecting me, somebody is upset, right? And so when we're in these chronically unsafe environments, we learn to shrink ourselves. We learn to turn that shame and that guilt inward, and we learn to stop speaking up, right? And that's just repression. Who are sensitive tend to be very prone to overstimulation, right? So when we're thinking sensitivity, it's not just emotions. Sensitivity is all stimulation, right? Stimulation of sounds, of your environment, of colors, of fabrics. Like, there's this one pair of pants that I just cannot stand wearing because I don't like how the fabric feels on my skin. And I don't know. I've never been tested for autism, but I work in the mental health field. I'm a therapist. I don't think that I quite meet all the criteria for autism, nor do I quite meet the criteria for ADHD, but I do have little bits and pieces, right? So I will just say that I'm neurodivergent. I have some issues with sensitivity. I have some issues with processing. My brain just works differently, okay? And when your brain works differently and you know how your brain works differently, you gotta find out how to support yourself. The things that work, the things that don't work, the things that bring you joy, the things that don't. What do you need in that moment if you're overstimulated? You need a container. You need to go sit by yourself. You need some quiet time. You need to go take a nap, right? These are the different things that we learn about ourselves to help best support us. Shaming ourselves, guilting ourselves, sitting there feeling bad, or talking to people who are like, oh, just get over it. Oh, you're just feeling too much, or you'll be okay. Everything's gonna be okay, right? If it was that simple, will we be even experiencing that? So yeah, overstimulation is a big thing. That's when, there's a difference between something I most recently reflected on was that there's a difference between being sensitive and being overwhelmed, right? Being overwhelmed means that you're feeling multiple emotions, you're going through multiple stressors, and it's too much on one person, right? Anybody in that position might feel overwhelmed. Anybody in that position might feel like they're burned out or it's too much, right? That's normal for that situation. Now, being sensitive might mean that things that you're experiencing, multiple emotions, multiple experiences, you feel it different, you process it different. someone who isn't processing all those things, right? They're not processing all the different factors. They're not processing the amount of things that somebody who's sensitive might be processing. It might not be affecting them in the same way because they're not even cognizant or aware of the nuances of whatever it is that you're processing.